The scent of ozone and ancient cedar exploded in the clearing as the heavy iron gates of the sanctuary were ripped from their hinges. The Lycan King found his love, but can they be together? Silas Thorne, his first name a sharp echo from the Da Vinci Code, his last name a legacy from Legends of the Fall, didn't shift into his wolf form. He didn't have to. The sheer kinetic energy of his presence made the very air vibrate with predatory authority. He was the high alpha of the Blackwood Pack, a man whose word was absolute law in the Shadowlands. But as he stepped over the threshold of the forbidden human settlement, his golden eyes locked onto a woman standing by the village well, and the world, 3 centuries of duty and war, simply stopped spinning. Clara Everdeen, her first name a soft whisper from the Nutcracker and the Four Realms, her last name a tribute to the defiance of the Hunger Games, dropped the wooden bucket she was carrying. The water splashed against her leather boots, but she didn't feel the cold. She felt the heat. A localized, magnetic pull that seemed to tether her soul to the mountain of a man standing amidst the wreckage of her village's only defense. She was a healer of the Silver Order, a society sworn to keep the beasts at bay with ancient rites and iron-tipped arrows. To her people he was the apocalypse. To her blood he was the only rhythm that had ever made sense. Hello to my incredible community from all over the globe. I'm so happy to have you back for this brand new heart-pounding journey. Before we see if these two worlds can ever truly collide, I have to know, where are you watching from today? Leave your country or city in the comments. I love seeing our family grow. Are you doing well? I hope you're ready for a story about breaking the rules for the sake of the heart. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please hit that subscribe button right now and join us. Your support allows me to keep bringing these emotional epics to life. Silas took a step forward, his heavy boots crushing the fallen iron. The village archers notched their arrows, the tips coated in wolfsbane, but Silas didn't even glance at them. His focus was entirely on Clara. The bond, the primal tether, hit him with the force of a physical blow. It was a golden cord of light only they could see, vibrating with the intensity of 1,000 suns. "You," Silas rasped, his voice a low, gravelly hum that made the windows of the nearby cottages rattle in their frames. Clara's heart hammered a frantic code against her ribs. She was supposed to hate him. She had been trained since childhood to identify the signs of a Lycan: the heightened scent, the unnatural grace, the eyes that held the wildness of the forest. But as Silas reached out a hand, his fingers trembling with a restraint that looked agonizing, she didn't see a monster. She saw a man who had been searching for a home his entire life and had finally found the front door. "The king is here for the girl," a voice screamed from the balcony of the Elders' Hall. It was Julian Vane, Madagascar for the first name, V for Vendetta for the last, the High Inquisitor of the Silver Order. "If he touches her, he breaks the Treaty of 1812. Fire on my command." The tension in the clearing snapped. A dozen bows flexed, their strings groaning under the pressure. Silas didn't flinch. He looked at Clara, his amber eyes pleading for something his pride would never allow him to say out loud. "If I stay, they will burn this village to the ground to purify you," Silas whispered, his voice carrying only to her. "If you come with me, you lose everything you've ever known. But if you stay, I will never be whole again." Clara looked at the arrows aimed at the man her soul recognized. She looked at the hateful faces of the people she had spent her life healing. The question wasn't just about love, it was about survival. The silence following Silas's ultimatum was more deafening than the roar of his arrival. In the flickering torchlight of the village square, Clara Everdeen felt the foundation of her world crumbling. To the Silver Order she was the white dove, their most gifted healer, a woman whose touch could knit bone and soothe the most jagged of spirits. But Clara's deepest desire wasn't to be a symbol of purity, it was to be free. Every night she looked at the heavy silver locket pressed against her collarbone, a gift from her mother, first name Evelyn, last name Abbott, the mummy and a quiet night. The locket was cold, a constant reminder of the rules of the blood she had to follow. But Clara harbored a secret that would see her exiled or worse. She didn't just heal with herbs. She healed with a strange golden warmth that flowed from her fingertips, a spark of the very wild magic the Order claimed was the mark of the beast. "Clara, step away from him," Julian Vane shouted, his eyes narrowing. Julian wasn't just an inquisitor. He was the man Clara was expected to marry to solidify the Order's power. He was cold, calculating, and viewed the world through the sights of a crossbow. He is a predator. He is playing on your mercy. Silas Thorne didn't growl. He didn't move. But the emotional stakes in his gaze were staggering. For 300 years he had led the Blackwood Pack through famine, territorial wars, and the slow, agonizing decline of their kind. His deepest fear was extinction, not of his body but of his soul. Without a mate, a Lycan King eventually succumbed to the gray haze, a madness where the wolf consumed the man entirely. "I am not playing Inquisitor," Silas said, his voice dropping to a vulnerable, raw whisper that only Clara could hear. "I am dying. And she is the only breath I have left." The connection between them deepened in that moment of shared honesty. Clara saw the exhaustion behind his power, the loneliness of a king who had to be a monster so his people could be safe. She saw a mirror of her own life, two souls trapped by duty, longing for a touch that didn't demand a sacrifice. Supporting characters pressed in from the shadows. Gideon Granger, the Lion King for the first name, Harry Potter for the last. Silas's beta and oldest friend, watched from the tree line. His hand was on his hilt, his eyes darting between the archers and his king. He knew that if Silas didn't leave now, the Blackwood Pack would be forced into a war they weren't ready to fight. "My king, the moon is turning," Gideon signaled with a low whistle. "We cannot stay in the open." Clara looked at Julian, who represented safety, tradition, and a life of quiet repression. Then she looked at Silas, who represented danger, passion, and a truth she had been running from her entire life. "I won't let you kill him," Clara said, her voice small but gaining strength. She stepped in front of Silas, her arms spread wide. The golden spark in her blood flickered, making her skin glow with a faint, ethereal light that matched the amber in Silas's eyes. The revelation was subtle, but for Julian Vane, it was a confirmation of his darkest suspicions. He didn't see a miracle, he saw a betrayal. "She's tainted," Julian whispered, the empathy in his eyes vanishing to be replaced by a cold, clinical intrigue. "The king hasn't just found a mate. He's found a heretic." The empathy between Silas and Clara was no longer just a bond. It was a target. They were two people from warring worlds, bound by a magic that neither fully understood, standing on the precipice of a choice that would ignite a revolution. The tension is building and the lines are being drawn in the sand. Silas and Clara are willing to risk everything, but the world is already turning against them. Who do you think is more dangerous? The king who would burn a village for love, or the inquisitor who would kill his own to maintain order? Let me know in the comments. I love reading your takes. And if you're rooting for Clara to choose her own path, make sure you've hit that like button. The air didn't just break, it shattered. Julian Vane's hand dropped, and the mechanical thrum of a dozen crossbows echoed through the clearing. The wolfsbane-tipped bolts hissed like vipers, cutting through the moonlight toward Silas's chest. But Silas Thorne was a blur of silver-gray fur and raw, untamed power. He didn't shift to run, he shifted to protect. With a guttural roar that vibrated in Clara's very teeth, the king threw himself in front of her. 3 bolts thudded into his massive shoulder, the hiss of the poison meeting his skin sounding like hot iron hitting water. He collapsed to one knee, his human face contorted in an agony that was more than physical. It was a chemical assault on his very essence. "Silas!" Clara screamed, her voice piercing the chaos. "Take the heretic," Julian commanded, his voice devoid of any remaining affection. "She has been corrupted by the beast. Bring me her head if she resists." The inciting incident didn't just launch a conflict. It forced a metamorphosis. As the Silver Order soldiers lunged with their electrified pikes, Clara felt a heat in her chest that wasn't fear. It was a dormant volcano finally reaching the surface. She reached out to Silas, her palms flat against his burning skin, and for the first time in her life she didn't just heal. She surged. A shock wave of golden, solar flame energy erupted from her touch. It wasn't the soft glow of a village medic. It was the blinding, ancient power of a solar warden, the legendary opposites of the Lycan race, long thought to be extinct. The blast sent the soldiers flying backward, their silver armor clattering against the stone well. Even Julian was thrown into the dirt, his eyes wide with a terror he couldn't hide. The first major plot twist was a jagged blade. Clara wasn't just a human mate. She was the one being the Silver Order was founded to find and weaponize. And Silas wasn't just her mate. He was her natural elemental predator. "Get up," Clara whispered, her eyes now burning with a steady, terrifying gold. She grabbed Silas's hand, the wolfsbane poison in his veins evaporating under the heat of her touch. "Clara, your eyes." Silas wheezed, looking at her as if she were a ghost. "We leave now," she said, her voice sounding like a chorus of bells. They didn't run like fugitives. They tore through the village line like a storm. Gideon Granger and the Blackwood wolves emerged from the trees, providing a wall of fur and fong that kept the archers at bay. But as they hit the treeline, Clara looked back one last time. She saw Julian Vane standing in the center of the square, holding her mother's silver locket which had been torn from her neck in the blast. "You've chosen the monster, Clara." Julian's voice followed them into the dark. "But remember, the sun always sets. And when it does, the wolf will realize you are the only thing left to eat." The inciting incident had raised the stakes to a cosmic level. Their union wasn't just forbidden by law, it was a violation of the very balance of nature. A solar warden and a Lycan King, fire and shadow, hunter and prey. As they disappeared into the deep ancient canopy of the Blackwood forest, Clara realized she hadn't just saved Silas. She had declared war on the only world she had ever known. She had traded her safety for a bond that might literally consume her. "I can't believe what just happened. Clara isn't just a healer, she's a solar warden. This changes everything. Their love isn't just dangerous, it's impossible." "Do you think Silas will be able to resist his instincts now that he knows Clara is his natural enemy?" Type resist or hunt in the comments right now. And if you're as shocked as I am, make sure you've hit that subscribe button. We are just getting started. Inside the forest, the silence of the trees offered no comfort. Silas looked at Clara, his amber eyes reflecting the fading golden glow of her skin. The attraction between them was now laced with a sharp, instinctual edge of fear. "The order won't stop," Silas said, his voice heavy with the weight of the crown he still wore. "They will bring the Iron Battalion. They will burn the forest to find you." "Then let them burn," Clara said, though her hands were shaking. "I'm not a white dove anymore, Silas. I'm the fire." The Blackwood forest was a cathedral of shadows, but tonight, it felt like a cage. As Silas led Clara deeper into the heart of his territory, the romantic tension between them was no longer just a spark. It was a high-voltage wire humming in a storm. Every time their hands brushed, a microscopic arc of golden light and silver shadow crackled, a physical manifestation of their warring natures. "My pack will smell the sun on you before we even reach the inner circle," Silas warned, his voice tight. He stopped by a blackwater spring, the moonlight filtering through the canopy like jagged glass. He reached out, his fingers hovering inches from Clara's glowing skin. "They have spent centuries hiding from the solar wardens. To them you aren't a mate. You're a beacon for their executioners." "Then I'll dim the light," Clara whispered, her heart aching at the conflict in his eyes. She focused on the heat in her veins, pulling it back, forcing the gold to retreat until she was just a woman again, shivering and vulnerable in the damp night air. The obstacle wasn't just the pack, it was the biological imperative. Silas's wolf was pacing behind his ribs, confused by a mate who smelled like the very fire that had burned their ancestors. Yet when he finally closed the distance and pulled her into his arms, the frustration melted into a desperate, grounding hope. He tucked her head under his chin, his scent of rain and musk enveloping her. "I will challenge anyone who questions you," he vowed into her hair. "Even the moon itself." "Are you feeling that tension?" Silas is literally caught between his biological instincts and his soul's recognition. If you think the Blackwood pack will eventually accept Clara, smash that like button right now. And I want to hear your theories. Do you think Julian Vane has a secret weapon against a solar warden? Tell me in the comments. If you're hooked on this impossible romance, make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss the midpoint revelation. While Silas and Clara navigated the emotional minefield of the forest, the human world was arming for a crusade. In the vaulted war room of the Silver Order, Julian Vane stood before a map of the Blackwood territories. Beside him stood a new threat, Seraphina Frost, Liqueur for the first name, X-Men for the last, a mercenary captain specializing in unnatural extraction. "The girl is the key to the Sun Forge," Julian hissed, slamming a heavy iron gauntlet onto the table. The Lycan King thinks he's found a wife. He's actually found the battery for our ultimate weapon. If we capture her alive, we can burn every forest from here to the sea. Red herrings began to surface. Julian leaked word to the border villages that the monster had kidnapped their healer for a blood ritual, inciting a frantic pitchfork and torch mob to act as a distraction for his elite iron battalion. Back at the Lycan stronghold, a fortress carved into the side of a living mountain, the reception was freezing. Elara Blackwood, the Hunger Games for the first name, the pack's ancestral name for the last, Silas's sister and a fierce warrior, blocked their path at the great gate. You bring a warden into our nursery, Silas? Elara's claws were fully extended, her eyes glowing a lethal violet. The elders are already howling for a coup. They say you've been glamored by the sun. She is my mate, Elara, Silas roared, his alpha presence flaring until the younger wolves nearby dropped to their bellies. And she is the only reason I am still sane. Character growth bloomed in the face of this adversity. Clara didn't hide behind Silas. She stepped forward, facing the snarling Elara. I am not here to burn you, Clara said, her voice steady despite the predatory heat radiating from the wolves. I am here because the Order is coming with iron and fire. They don't just want the king. They want the world. And I am the only one who knows how their weapons work. The tension in the courtyard was a physical weight. The romantic subplot was now inextricably tied to the survival of a species. As Silas and Clara retreated to the king's private balcony, looking out over a kingdom on the brink of war, the hope they shared was fragile. They're gathering at the border, Silas whispered, his heightened senses picking up the rhythmic clank of armor miles away. Julian isn't coming for a rescue. He's coming for a harvest. The moon hung like a silver sickle over the Blackwood stronghold, but the air inside the king's private sanctum was thick with the scent of old parchment and a rising unnatural heat. Silas and Clara stood over the Codex of Eclipses, an ancient tome bound in both wolf hide and gold leaf, a book that hadn't been opened since the Great Separation. My father told me the wardens were parasites, Silas whispered, his clawed finger tracing a diagram of a sun and a moon locked in a permanent embrace. He said you stole the light from the forest to fuel your fires. And my order taught me that lichens were the shadow that tried to swallow the world, Clara countered, her hand hovering over the page. As her fingers neared the ink, the golden light in her veins reacted. The parchment didn't burn, it transformed. The hidden ink, written in a frequency only a warden's light could reveal, shimmered into existence. The game-changing twist hit them like a physical blow. The Solar Wardens and the Lycan Kings weren't ancient enemies. They were two halves of a single celestial soul. It's a resonance, Clara breathed, her voice trembling with the weight of the revelation. The Wardens weren't hunters. They were the stabilizers. The Codex revealed a terrifying truth. The gray haze that drove Lycan Kings mad wasn't a disease of the blood. It was a literal starvation of the spirit. Without the solar anchor of a Warden mate, a Lycan's power would eventually collapse under its own gravity. And without the lunar well of a Lycan mate, a Warden's fire would eventually incinerate their own body. We aren't just mates, Silas, Clara said, looking up at him with wide, tear-filled eyes. We are a survival mechanism. If we don't bond, I will eventually burn to ash and you will become the monster Julian says you are. The stakes were suddenly higher than a throne or a village. This challenged everything they believed. Their attraction wasn't just a choice. It was a desperate biological necessity for the world's balance. Stop everything. Did you just hear that? They aren't enemies. They are literally the only things keeping each other alive. This changes the entire war. If you think this revelation makes their love even more beautiful, drop a soulmates in the comments. And hey, if you're as obsessed with this lore as I am, make sure you've hit that subscribe button. We're moving into the darkest hour, and the stakes are at an absolute breaking point. The revelation deepened their connection into a moment of raw, shared vulnerability. Silas pulled Clara toward him, his forehead resting against hers. For the first time he didn't fight the pull. He let the shadow of his soul reach out to the light of hers. I don't care about the prophecies, Silas rasped. I just know that when I'm near you the screaming in my head finally stops. But the passion of the moment was shattered by a bone-chilling sound, the rhythmic mechanical thud of the Iron Battalion's steam cannons. Julian Vane hadn't waited for dawn. He had used the red herring mob to mask the approach of his elite hunters. Through the balcony doors, they saw the treeline of the Blackwood forest erupt in white phosphorus flames. The Order wasn't just attacking, they were cleansing. "He's using the Sun Forge," Clara gasped, recognizing the signature of the weapon Julian had built from her mother's stolen research. "He's using a synthetic version of my light to burn your people." The betrayal cut deep. Julian was weaponizing Clara's own heritage to commit genocide. "Gideon! Alara!" Silas roared, his voice echoing through the stronghold as he shifted into his massive, battle-hardened wolf form. "To the gates. Protect the young. Clara, stay in the inner sanctum. If they get to you—" "No," Clara said, her eyes flaring with a gold so bright it illuminated the entire room. "He's using my light, Silas. Only I can take it back." As the first wall of the stronghold groaned under the pressure of a massive iron ram, the midpoint revelation had turned their romance into a desperate race against time. They had found the truth, but the world was already on fire. The world didn't just break. It burned in a blinding synthetic white. The Iron Battalion steam cannons didn't fire lead. They fired pressurized canisters of liquid noon, a volatile, alchemical concoction Julian Vane had perfected using Clara's stolen research. When the first shell struck the great gate of the Blackwood stronghold, the explosion wasn't red or orange. It was a sterile, soul-searing gold that turned the ancient stone to glass. "Silas!" Clara's scream was lost in the roar of collapsing masonry. The separation was instantaneous and brutal. A secondary blast, triggered by a hidden saboteur within the pack's own ranks, brought down the ceiling of the inner sanctum. A massive beam of silver oak slammed between them, pinning Silas's hind legs and throwing Clara toward the balcony's edge. Through the choking dust and the smell of singed fur, Silas Thorne struggled to rise, his massive wolf form trembling. But the liquid noon was a neurotoxin to Lycans. It didn't just burn his skin, it attacked the lunar well in his spirit. His amber eyes flickered, the light in them dying as the gray haze he had fought his entire life flooded in to fill the vacuum. "Clara, run." Silas's voice was a broken rasp, half man, half beast, and entirely agonizing. But Clara Everdeen couldn't run. Standing on the balcony was Julian Vane, his silver-plated armor reflecting the fires below. In his hand he held a specialized containment harpoon, its tip humming with a dark, inverted frequency. "You were meant to be the dawn, Clara," Julian said, his voice cold and devoid of any remaining affection. "Instead you chose to be the shadow's whore. Now you'll be the engine that grinds them into dust." Before she could summon the golden fire in her veins, the harpoon struck. It didn't pierce her flesh, it locked onto her energy. Clara gasped as the solar anchor within her was forcibly suppressed. The golden light vanished from her eyes, leaving her gray and hollowed out. She collapsed into Julian's arms, her strength siphoned away into the massive battery on his back. "I can't breathe. This is too much." Silas is pinned and losing his mind to the haze, and Clara has been turned into a literal battery for the enemy. Do you think Silas can break free without Clara's light to guide him? Or is the Blackwood pack doomed to extinction tonight? Drop it, stay strong in the comments if you're still rooting for them. And please, if you're as devastated as I am, make sure you've hit that subscribe button. We need a miracle and we need it now. The situation was utterly hopeless. Down in the courtyard, Gideon Granger and Alara Blackwood were being driven back by soldiers wearing heat-resistant suits. The wolves' primary advantage, their speed and predatory instinct, was useless against a weapon that mimicked the sun they were born to avoid. Julian dragged the limp Clara toward a waiting armored carriage. He looked back at the trapped, suffering king beneath the rubble. "Look at your mate now, Thorne," Julian mocked. "She isn't a woman anymore. She's the fuel for my new world. And you're just a stray dog waiting for the vet." As the carriage tore away, leaving a trail of white fire in its wake, Silas let out a sound that shattered the hearts of every wolf who heard it. It wasn't a roar of defiance, it was a howl of pure, unadulterated despair. The darkest hour had claimed them. The king was broken, his queen was a prisoner, and the forest that had protected them for 1,000 years was turning to ash. Silas felt the madness of the gray haze finally closing over his mind like a heavy, suffocating shroud. He was forgetting the shape of her face. He was forgetting the sound of her voice. He was becoming only the hunger. The gray haze was a cold, suffocating ocean and Silas Thorne was drowning in it. Every memory of his humanity, his name, his crown, the feel of the wind on his face, was being eroded by the relentless hunger of the wolf. But then a single sharp spark pierced the fog. It wasn't a memory, it was a sensation. The phantom heat of Clara's hand against his chest. "I am not a dog," Silas growled, the words sounding like grinding tectonic plates. The turning point wasn't a miracle from above. It was a realization from within. Silas stopped fighting the haze and instead he inverted it. He reached into the void of the gray haze and realized that if he couldn't have the light, he would become the absolute absence of it. A new strength, dark and primordial, surged through his limbs. With a roar that shook the very foundations of the mountain, Silas shattered the silver oak beam pinning him. He didn't just stand, he rose as something the world hadn't seen in an age, an eclipse alpha. "I am screaming." Silas just leveled up in the middle of a mental breakdown. He's not just a king anymore, he's the eclipse. If you're ready to see him tear through that iron battalion, type "eclipse" in the comments right now. And for the love of all things holy, if you haven't subscribed yet, you are missing the greatest comeback in history. Miles away, inside the moving iron carriage, Clara Everdeen was experiencing her own turning point. Julian Vane sat opposite her, watching the golden energy pulse through the crystalline tubes of the Sunforge battery. "Don't fight it, Clara," Julian said, his voice smug. "The more you resist, the more it drains you. You're finally being useful to the Order." But Clara wasn't resisting. She was conducting. She remembered the Codex. A warden's fire incinerates the self unless anchored. She stopped trying to hold her light inside and instead she threw the doors of her soul wide open. She became a conduit for every ounce of solar energy Julian was trying to steal. "You want my light, Julian?" Clara whispered, her skin beginning to glow with a blinding white-hot intensity that made the metal walls of the carriage groan. "Take it all." The turning point arrived with a deafening crack. The Sunforge battery couldn't handle the raw, unfiltered output of a warden who had stopped being afraid. The crystalline tubes shattered, spraying liquid noon across the interior. The carriage didn't just stop. It detonated in a bloom of golden fire, throwing Julian into the mud and freeing Clara from her shackles. Back at the stronghold, Silas saw the explosion on the horizon. The solar anchor was back. The connection between them snapped taut, pulling him toward her like a magnet. "Gideon! Elara!" Silas shouted, his voice now carrying the resonant power of the eclipse. "The tide has turned. The sun is rising in the west." The pack, seeing their king transformed and the enemy's weapons failing, let out a collective howl that drowned out the sound of the cannons. The fear was gone, replaced by a cold, lethal determination. Silas took off into the forest, a blur of shadow that the phosphorus flames couldn't touch. The final confrontation was set. The king was no longer broken and the warden was no longer a battery. They were two forces of nature heading toward a collision that would decide the fate of both their species. The battlefield was a hellscape of white phosphorus and obsidian shadows. Julian Vane, his armor blackened and his face a mask of scorched pride, stood before the remains of the Iron Battalion. Behind him loomed the Aurelian Colossus, a towering steam-driven automaton powered by the residual energy stolen from Clara. It was a metal god designed to end the Lycan race forever. "It doesn't matter if you broke the carriage, Clara," Julian screamed into the wind. "The forge is primed. The sun is under my command." But then the forest went silent. The crackle of the flames seemed to freeze. From the tree-line, a shadow emerged that was darker than the night itself. Silas Thorne didn't just run, he moved like a glitch in reality. As the Eclipse Alpha, his fur absorbed the very light of the phosphorus fires, leaving him a silhouette of pure, predatory void. "Julian." Silas's voice didn't come from his throat. It echoed from the earth beneath their feet. At the same moment, Clara Everdeen stepped out from the opposite side of the clearing. Her hair was a halo of white-gold flame, and her eyes were two miniature suns. The climactic resolution wasn't just a fight, it was a symphony of opposites. "My heart is pounding. Look at them. The eclipse and the sun standing together against a machine of hate. If you think Julian is about to get exactly what he deserves, smash that like button right now. And I want to see your predictions. How do you think they'll take down that Colossus? Tell me in the comments. If you've stayed with us this far, you are a legend. Make sure you're subscribed for the final payoff. The Colossus raised its massive iron arm, a beam of concentrated liquid noon charging in its palm. Fire! Julian commanded. The beam erupted, a pillar of heat that should have vaporized anything in its path. But Silas and Clara didn't dodge. They intersected. In the most surprising and satisfying twist of the battle, Silas leaped into the air and Clara caught his massive paws with her glowing hands. The moment they touched, the resonance from the codex wasn't just a theory. It was a weapon. The golden light of the Warden and the void shadow of the eclipse swirled together, creating a gravity well that swallowed the Colossus's beam whole. They weren't just fighting, they were dancing. Silas used his shadow speed to blink through the automaton's defenses, tearing at the brass joints, while Clara followed behind, cauterizing the wounds with solar heat so the machine couldn't repair itself. Impossible! Julian shrieked, drawing his silver saber. The light and the dark cannot hold. They don't just hold, Julian, Clara shouted, her voice ringing with the power of 1,000 dawns. They balance. Silas landed a final, crushing blow to the Colossus's chest plate, exposing the glowing core. Clara stepped forward not to destroy it but to reclaim it. She reached into the machine, her hand passing through the white-hot energy as if it were cool water. With a sharp tug, she pulled the solar anchor out of the engine. The Aurelian Colossus didn't explode. It simply went cold. The massive machine slumped into the mud, a hollow shell of iron. Julian Vane fell to his knees, his saber clattering to the ground. He looked up to see the massive shadow of the Eclipse Alpha towering over him, and beside the wolf, the radiant glow of the woman he had tried to break. "The Silver Order is finished, Julian," Silas said, shifting back into his human form, his hand immediately finding Clara's. He looked at the man who had tried to destroy his world not with hatred, but with a terrifying kingly pity. "You fought for a world of walls. We fought for the horizon." Justice was delivered as Gideon and Alara emerged from the trees, leading the remaining soldiers of the Iron Battalion away in chains. The battle was over. The central mystery of their existence was solved, and the most dangerous dilemma had been answered with a single, united front. The dawn that broke over the Blackwood forest wasn't synthetic or alchemical. It was a soft, bruised purple that bled into a triumphant gold, filtering through the charred ribs of the trees like a promise. The air, once thick with the metallic tang of liquid noon, now carried the sweet, restorative scent of rain-drenched moss and the first morning bird song. Silas Thorne and Clara Everdeen stood at the edge of the great clearing, their hands still interlaced. The black veins of the eclipse had receded from Silas's skin, and the blinding white fire in Clara's eyes had softened into a steady, warm hazel. They weren't just survivors. They were the architects of a new equilibrium. "They're waiting for you," Clara whispered, looking toward the stronghold where the Blackwood pack and the remaining villagers from the sanctuary had gathered. For the first time in history, the wolves weren't snarling and the humans weren't reaching for silver. They were simply waiting. Together. Silas turned to her, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw with a tenderness that made the world around them fall away. "They aren't waiting for a king, Clara. They're waiting for us. The Codex was right, the separation was the lie. The union is the truth." The emotional closure was a physical weight lifting off the land. Character growth was evident in every gaze. Alara Blackwood stood beside Gideon Granger, helping a human elder clear the debris from the well. The white dove and the beast had become the bridge. "We've reached the end of the road and my heart is so full." Silas and Clara didn't just save each other. They saved the soul of the world. What was your favorite part of their journey? Was it the moment Silas became the eclipse, or Clara overloading the Sunforge? Let me know in the comments. I love celebrating these endings with you. And if you want to see more stories where love changes the world, make sure you've hit that subscribe button and the notification bell. You are the reason I tell these stories. The resolution of the romantic subplot felt earned in every drop of sweat and blood. Silas led Clara to the center of the clearing, where the ancient stone of accord sat. He didn't ask her to renounce her humanity, and she didn't ask him to cage his wolf. Instead, they knelt together, pressing their palms into the moss-covered granite. As they did, a pulse of amber and gold light rippled through the earth. The burnt trees didn't magically regrow, but green shoots began to curl from the blackened bark, a sign of recovery and new beginnings. The gray haze was gone forever, anchored by the solar warmth of the woman Silas loved. "I choose you," Clara said, her voice clear and resonant. "Not because a prophecy told me to, but because you are the only one who ever saw the fire in me and didn't try to put it out." "And I choose you," Silas replied, his voice a low, steady hum of devotion. "Because you are the only light that doesn't make me want to hide in the dark." The final loose ends were tied with a sense of justice and peace. Julian Vane was not executed. He was sentenced to live in the very forest he tried to burn, stripped of his rank and forced to see the beauty of the world he had tried to colonize. The Silver Order was disbanded, its records turned over to Clara to ensure the Sunforge would never be used for war again. As the sun fully cleared the horizon, Silas pulled Clara into a deep, fulfilling kiss. It wasn't a kiss of desperation anymore. It was a kiss of fulfillment. The Lycan King had found his love, and against all odds, they had found a way to be together. The story ended with hope, a sense that while there would be more battles to fight and more ancient prejudices to unlearn, the horizon was no longer a threat. It was an invitation. Thank you all for joining me for this epic 40-minute journey. I hope Silas and Clara's story stayed with you as much as it did with me. I can't wait to see you in the next one. Stay emotional, stay addicted to the story, and I'll see you soon.